you screenwriters, comic book writers, and storytellers everywhere. My name is Mitch Smith, and today what we're going to be talking about is brainstorming, how to do that, and catching cliches while you're brainstorming your next blockbuster masterpiece. Now, as always, if you like this lesson, please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/MitchSmithMedia and support us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for more updates and awesome projects. Now, let's get right into it. So one of my favorite quotes of all time about screenwriting comes from writer, director, actor, producer Jordan Peele, who said, "If you can predict where an audience thinks you're going to go, you can use it against them and they'll love you for it." So when I'm crafting my outlines and brainstorming new ideas for a story, I like to envision the most cliche or most predictable way that I can tell that story, and then I think of all the ways that I can subvert those expectations. Now, I'm going to show you a couple examples of films that have done this, and then we're going to go through and kind of brainstorm our own slasher script. So, but before we do that, let's talk about the difference between a screenwriting trope and a screenwriting cliche. Now, for our purposes, we're going to define these. A trope is a commonly recurring story beat or literary device. Now, a trope may be something like the wise old mentor character, like Gandalf the Grey or Dumbledore, or it may be the hero defeating the villain at the end of the story. Once again, Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. While a cliche is a literary trope that has been overused or used so lazily, so frequently, that it becomes expected and can really hurt the originality and freshness of your story. So an example of a cliche, or several examples of a cliche, are like the damsel in distress. Now that's almost any Transformers film, recently the Michael Bay Transformers films, or the chosen one hero, like Jake Sully in Avatar, or perhaps the absent/missing parent, who we know will show up again towards the end to impart some final wisdom or give our hero some magic trident, such as Aquaman. Now, these are, again, very base definitions, but I hope that they give you a quick understanding of what a trope and a cliche is and how they differ. So now that we've done that, let's try this technique together so that I hope you can use this in your own writing and your own brainstorming. Now, like I said, we're going to do a slasher script because I'm a huge horror fan and I know the tropes and kind of expectations of that genre. So when you want to do this or use this method, one thing you're going to want to do before you do any writing is immerse yourself in the genre or the subgenre. By that, I mean, I want you to learn about it. I want you to read about it, read scripts from it. Check out our screenwriting resources video, also available to our Patreon supporters. And of course, you want to watch all the films that you can in this genre. You want to watch good films, you want to watch bad films. But for the bad films in this genre, you want to watch these and realize and talk about why they don't work. And then look at that when you're doing your own writing, because if something doesn't work over here, it will likely not work for you in your own writing. So, as with anything, when you're watching, when you're reading, or when you're discussing these scripts, these films, do it as a critical viewer. And that means thinking about all the story beats, the character development, the way the author and the director construct the scenes, everything like that. This will make sure you understand and have a very good handle on the genre and on these specific tropes. Now, let's get into creating our own slasher story. So what we usually do with this, and how a slasher usually starts, is an opening kill. That sets the tone and gives us a hint of the threat, the killer, or the monster. So now we know what the opening is. Let's see how we can subvert these expectations. So an example of a film that has subverted these expectations is Scream 1. By doing that, they cast Drew Barrymore, who was heavily featured in the marketing, in the promo materials, and she was a huge star at the time, so everyone kind of assumed she was going to be the main character or the final girl. Now, of course, she meets her maker in the first few minutes. And that was a huge surprise as we then go and meet our group of teens and start our real story. So, after our opening kill, we move right along and are introduced to a group of teens or adults, basically our group of victims, who are all connected in some way. Now, typically, there is some tragic error in their past. Maybe they've accidentally killed someone and are keeping it a secret, or they're all involved in some other kind of shady business that connects them all, connects their families. Somehow they are all related. Now, once we've met them and kind of have an idea of our characters, they're also staples like the jock, the goth, the popular girl, etc. Once we've met them, we have our killer, who either comes back from the dead for revenge, is a family member or a friend of the victim that maybe the teens have killed, or that, is related to this incident that the teens are keeping a secret in some way. And this killer starts to exact their own revenge on the guilty parties. Now, some examples of subversions of that trope are the very first I Know What You Did Last Summer. To be fair, the fisherman, or the killer, is the one the kids hit and then try to hide, but in terms of being related to them, he's really just a crazy old man who is hunting these teens for sport and doesn't really have a backstory or a more tangible motive than that. And I want to say I'm specifically talking about the first I Know What You Did Last Summer because I have not seen all the sequels. And for the purposes of this exercise, we're talking about writing a single standalone story. Now, we're also introduced to our final girl. An example of a subversion of this trope is Hostel 2005, where we have our final guy, Paxton. And it's not just that he's a guy instead of a girl, but he's not that likable at first, and in fact is one of the meathead party guy characters in the film, which is why it's doubly surprising that he becomes our final guy, or our kind of root for character, or the character that we root for. Now, finally, the killer is unmasked in a showdown with the final girl, and we as an audience, along with our final girl, discover who is responsible. Now, there are some subversions here, such as Friday the 13th, Part 1, Pamela Voorhees. Now, she is a family member of the deceased child, but it wasn't really expected as we were kind of shown the silhouette of a large hulking man, and of course, the Jason Voorhees we now know is this big, muscled, almost invincible killer. Also, Scream 1, where there are not just one killer, but there are two killers. And then, of course, once the final girl defeats the killer, or killers, as in Scream 2, there is a final little sting or teaser where the killer comes back from the dead, or there's some reveal that shows, oh, they're not actually dead, or there's more to come. Now, there are some subversions of this as well, such as Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, where we find out at the end that Michael Myers is in fact dead, but we see that Laurie Strode has been committed to a mental asylum, which hints that she will escape and become the new Halloween killer in the unmade Rob Zombie Halloween 3. You could also argue that a subversion of this is the 2018 Halloween, in which Laurie Strode finally traps Michael Myers in the basement of a burning house and escapes with her daughter. Now, if you've seen any of the teasers for the upcoming Halloween, you know Michael Myers isn't dead. But what this does to subvert the, oh, the killer's still alive ending is that it doesn't end with the last jump scare or a reveal of Michael walking out of the burning house or anything like that. Finally, there is a recent film that does a whole remaster and a whole subversion of all these cliches, and that is Happy Death Day 1. Now, in it, it's kind of a Groundhog Day meets a slasher film, in that the main girl is killed over and over again, and she has to keep reliving the same day until she can figure out who the killer is. So, that's a quick look at some other films that have subverted this, and the general tropes or expectations for a slasher film. So, now let's try to create our own slasher film. Now, for our slasher film, we're of course going to start with an opening kill. So let's think about how we can flip this. Maybe we can have our killer running after our final girl, and then the killer is caught. Let's say the police catch our killer, and in the credits, we see the trial and we see that this killer is sent to jail. That's a total flip on expectations, because now, instead of this being sort of our introduction to the killer, he's already had all that. We've already had all the teens killed, and now we're with the killer as he's being punished and sent to jail. So once we do that and we are with our killer in jail, we can play with lots of tropes here as we meet our teens, or again, our victims. So we can do the jock, the nerd, and we can switch their roles around as we need. For instance, maybe the jock in this prison is actually a real tech genius. Maybe he hacked into his school or his works database to either change everyone's grades or give himself a real high pay raise or something like that. And maybe the goth girl is actually the mean popular one in this prison. So fun ways we can kind of do that. And of course, maybe our final girl is supposedly innocent and she is awaiting an appeal. Again, making us like her while still accepting she's in prison and is maybe not the final girl we expect. And of course, in the jail, kids start dying one by one in increasingly gruesome fashion. Now, as these characters do die, we as an audience, we can keep them on edge by putting out all sorts of red herrings, like hinting, oh, it's this character, or oh, it's the prison guard. And of course, hinting that there is a silent killer, the one we saw at the intro, who has just been moved into the prison. And then, of course, people are dying. So making an audience think it's got to be the killer and he is taking revenge or just being a psychopath. Now that we've done this and we've set up all of these things, we can easily do a cool reveal where we make the final killer unmasking to show that it is actually our final girl the whole time, that she has been the killer and maybe wasn't so innocent as we were first brought to believe. Now, of course, we need a sequel setup. So for our sequel setup, we can do something as simple as having our final girl get released from prison and go back out into the world to wreak havoc, because that is the exact opposite of how these usually end, with their killer being killed or imprisoned or whatever it is. But now we're having our killer released back out into the world to wreak havoc or do whatever she pleases. Now, this is just all off the top of my head, and I'm hoping that it helps you see generally how I look at cliches and then try to use them to my advantage to play with an audience's expectations, or if you're just a writer, a screenwriter's expectations, or a reader's expectations. So the last thing that I will say about this is that all tropes are screenwriting tropes for a reason. They're popular and they're used so much because they work. So if you do have to use a trope, or if you find yourself not being able to get around it, don't worry, because while you want to subvert them as much as you can and tell your own original story, sometimes you will use a trope, and that's okay. It will not ruin it. It will not make your story the most cliche or predictable thing ever. Just be careful not to use too many of them, or not to use them in a way that's lazy or cliche. So I hope this video helped you, and if it did, please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/MitchSmithMedia. And like I said above, please do consider checking out Mitch Smith Media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates and awesome content from all of our film, television, and comic book projects. Thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope that this has helped you and that I see you next time. Bye for now.